First up is a film called Bugonia. It stars Emma Stone and Jesse Plemons. It's directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, and Emma Stone plays a high-powered CEO. Jesse Plemons plays, we'll call him a fanaticist / conspiracy theorist. He ends up kidnapping Emma Stone and is convinced she's an alien. This is all in the trailers. I had not actually seen the trailer before watching this film. I just knew it was Yorgos Lanthimos. I went, all right, I'm in. And what I didn't realize about this film is actually an adaptation of a 2003 Korean film called Save the Green Planet by Jang Joon-hwan. And not knowing that, seeing this film, I came out of it going, this is truly a brilliant film. And I still think it is a brilliant film. It is a brilliant adaptation. And this is one of those rare times where I do think potentially the remake / adaptation actually brings something extra to the table. I went back and I watched Save the Green Planet, and conceptually, a lot of the core DNA is there. I just think what they have done in the 22 years since is actually made it really particularly relevant to modern times. You know, it is this kind of reflection of two layers of opposing fanaticism. One is the dedication to being a corporate CEO and like cost cutting and, you know, just kind of profits, which is embodied in Emma Stone's character. You know, she's very just kind of cutthroat in many senses. And then there's the other side of the coin, which is this equally dedicated but maybe less resourced level of obsession in the form of Jesse Plemons' character, who is like, it gave me kind of QAnon vibes. And honestly, both characters pretty unlikable at times, and yet you constantly are switching back and forth in whose perspective you believe, you know, who you are rooting for. Do you want the both to fail? Like, what is going on here? And I think it does a really great job. The remake does a really great job of balancing the perspectives of the two characters versus the original film, which I think is a little more almost on the nose and a little more direct in some ways. And I think the pacing of this English language remake / adaptation, again, I keep referring to it as an adaptation because they did change a decent number of things. And I think for the better, and the source material is very impressive. You know, conceptually, it is truly wild. And so I love seeing this collaboration come together between the screenplay by Will Tracy, the directing by Yorgos Lanthimos, and then the performances. And this might be unpopular. I'm not a huge Emma Stone person. You know, I can respect her as a performer, but this role, I was like, she is so good at capturing the just cold nature of a CEO operating at that power and just like feeling unchecked in the world. And Emma Stone is effectively having her world upended by somebody she would have absolutely considered inconsequential prior to their encounter. So I just thought it was brilliant in that it's constantly changing the perspective of who you are kind of allying with. You know, do you believe one person over the other? I just think it's really clever. And again, one of those times where I think maybe time and additional perspectives have actually made this a stronger film than the original source material. And, you know, again, all credit to the original source material for coming up with the majority of the skeleton and, you know, bones of this film and some of the specifics too. But I just loved seeing this. You know, again, knew nothing going into it. I'm not the biggest Emma Stone person, but I recognize game when I see it. And, you know, I respected previous performances of hers, but I was just like, she was so good at channeling the cold calculation that a CEO of that level has to have. And then Jesse Plemons with just kind of like bottling this emotion up and letting it release at the right time. And I just was very impressed by this film. It's not going to be for everyone. I very much acknowledge that. You know, at times it is a little ridiculous and extreme. If you're squeamish, there might be a few moments that get you. And I also don't know if, like the original film, it's going to stand the test of time. You know, in 20 years, it might feel very antiquated. Not that the original feels super antiquated. The other original one is like a little more campy, almost an extreme than this version, although this is still pretty extreme. However, I think if you were to see this movie right now, it very much speaks to this moment in time and captures just like the way that information is treated and flows and how people will take that and just completely shape their lives around it. I'm going to give this a 4.7 out of 5. The other film I have this week is Hedda. It is Nia DaCosta's adaptation of Hedda Gabler. And I will acknowledge that it seems like I might be potentially in the minority so far on my opinion on this. So I don't, you know, this is a film that conceptually I want to succeed. I really like Nia DaCosta. It stars Tessa Thompson as Hedda. She's an actress whose performances I have historically really enjoyed and appreciated. You know, I wanted this to succeed, but when I heard it was, you know, basically a remake of Hedda, which is an Ibsen story, I went, oh boy, you know, it's challenging. It's a tough one. And I think Nia DaCosta is trying to bring some unique layers to this version of it. You know, just the inherent casting of Tessa Thompson in this role brings a whole thing about race to it. And then, of course, there's this additional factor, and I don't think this is a huge spoiler. It's in all the trailers, etc. But, there's a queer relationship, which it doesn't exist in the original. So we've switched the gender of one of the characters, which I think, again, all in concept, works really well. One of the challenges for me in seeing this film, and I saw it at TIFF, and I will acknowledge that, any film I see at TIFF, I've seen probably 3 other films that day, right? And so I'm a little exhausted, and it's not necessarily always the best circumstances to see a film, but then I revisited it. So here we go. But yeah, so I think that, well, one... Again, I really like Tessa Thompson as an actress, but she's doing this very exaggerated British accent that I don't think sits well with me. It might not be a problem for some people, but I just found it a little bit ridiculous and a little bit almost caricature-ish. The other thing is we introduce these queer storylines and these, race storylines, and yet it's very text, not subtext in terms of addressing it. And it felt very surface level to me when I feel like, if you're going to do this, let's not just slap these factors on and go like, yes, this inherently you should understand that the stakes have been raised because of XYZ things. I wanted there to be more nuance with it, and I felt like emotionally, like Tessa Thompson's Hedda was at an 11 the whole time, and there wasn't really enough kind of like digestion time for the character. Also, a little bit of a difference is I can't remember if the original material takes place over an extended amount of time, but I think it does, or at least not one evening. And it feels like there's a lot going on. And my friend Matt pointed this out, like it's hard to believe character development happens over the course of one extended evening. You can have plot development happen, but have actual characters, like have revelatory experiences, etc. It's a little harder to believe. Again, I conceptually love the idea of adding these factors. I just wish the execution had been a little more elegant. Visually, it's a beautiful film, it is very opulent, the costumes, etc., but that does not a film make. And, I think also some of this is just the source material of Hedda Gabler is not, maybe it's just not my favorite. Maybe we've seen it before. I think actually what I would have potentially liked to see is this as a mini series and not a feature film. This is one of those few times where I'm going to say, ooh, I think if you wanted to give this breathing room to explore this, and you can still set it over one party at that point, but we as an audience get to spend more time with the characters. Like that may have been a better approach to this than consolidating it and trying to fit in all these really heady topics in a very short amount of time and then not maybe doing them the justice that they deserve. So that is, I think, my kind of big takeaway from this. They gave it a big swing, and I respect that, but it just wasn't for me personally. I think there's going to be a subset of people going into this just not knowing anything about the material and then just going, okay, yay, Tessa Thompson or whatever it may be, and potentially being disappointed. So I just want to give like a little bit of caution there. Overall, I'm going to give this a 3.3 out of 5.